Sir. Let me bring in other guests. Ashok Sajanhar is former diplomat and signatory against the documentary. Professor Gao is former Chinese diplomat. We also have Kuldeep Shekhawat, director of MATV. What is becoming clear, Ashok Sajanhar, increasingly is that the BBC is a broadcaster which stands compromised. The Richard Sharp episode talks about it. The Spectator article is also hinting in that direction. But this larger conspiracy, the larger Chinese conspiracy that is being hinted at through this Hawaii article, which was also stated by Mahesh Jethamalani, is it a stretch of imagination, or do you think it's very much possible because it's G20 year and also India's position vis-a-vis the global stage?
Thank you very much, Maria, for having me on your show. Let me make 2 points here.
Yes.
Number one, China will not let go of any opportunity to bring down India. We have seen it in the past. It's whether it is with Pakistan, whether it is with Sri Lanka, Maldives, even as far as Bangladesh is concerned, it has tried all tricks in the trade to contain India in some way or the other. Whether it is on the issue of designation of terrorists as far as Pakistani terrorists are concerned. So in my mind, it is very clear that China will let go of no opportunity. And particularly when it sees that China's stock in the world is going down, India's stock in the world is rising in every sense of the word, whether the manner in which it is handling the Russia-Ukraine conflict and the pressure from the West, the manner in which it has handled the pandemic, the vaccine, Maitri, etc., the Voice of the Global South Summit, the G20 presidency, you name it. I think India's stock is rising globally. China's stock, on the other hand, is going down. We have seen a GDP of 3%, etc., and the population also coming down. The future prospects also not looking too good.
Yes, so the timing is a suspect. The timing is a suspect, and what is clear is that there is much more than what meets the eye. It's very clear that why would you, make a documentary on something that happened in 2002 and you do not really present the right picture? Professor Victor, another act of desperation, would you say? Because if you look at the Spectator article, it does talk about how, there have been efforts made by Hawaii to ensure that the BBC flourishes. It says that the advertisements displayed on bbc.com this week shows advertisement paid and presented by Hawaii boasting about the new frontier of education. It says very clearly that that's not enough to deter the BBC, what is still taking Hawaii's money to fund its overseas journalism. So overseas journalism of BBC is being funded by Hawaii is very clear. So if that is the linkage that you establish, it certainly leads to the larger conspiracy against India.
Thank you very much for having me. Please allow me to make several points.
Please
First, if there is anyone which can control BBC, it is the UK government, nothing else. The second point is BBC has very strained relations with China because China considers BBC's reports about China misleading, fabricated, and did not represent the truth and the fact on the ground, to such an extent that China actually banned the BBC from beaming into China to the Chinese audience. So there is hostility perceived by the Chinese government that BBC has demonstrated consistently over the years against China. Now, if anyone really charges China or a Chinese company as exercising control of BBC or BBC's overseas journalism, I personally would believe it is ludicrous. Okay. I personally have been interviewed by BBC, TV channel, radio channels of all kinds numerous times over the years, and I know how BBC operates.
Okay, Professor Victor,
yes.
Another part of this article, because it talks about that linkage. It says that the content was made by the BBC's sponsored content team, Storyworks, when the partnership was first announced 3 years ago. BBC reporters were horrified, with one telling BuzzFeed and nearly threw up. A current employee, speaking on condition of anonymity, told Steer Pike that they were shocked that the BBC was still taking money from a company which with such close ties to the Chinese state when it was us, that is the corporation, who exposed the Chinese abuse in Uyghur camps last year. So if anything, there are people working with the BBC who are talking about this money arrangement.
I think such fear or concern about Huawei, if we are talking about Huawei, is very much misguided. You may know, because of huge business successes over the years, Huawei has been one of the biggest contributor in the world to educational facilities, media facilities of all kinds in many countries in the world. And I understand there is a strict policy for Huawei and the recipient companies or institutions to follow. But anyway, if anyone believes that BBC will be subject to the influence of a Chinese company, I personally would not only be shocked, but also would consider such accusation as being very ludicrous, because I know for sure that BBC is not controlled by anyone but the British government. So if you have a accusing finger to point it at the British government.
Fine enough. Ashok Sajanhar, please respond to Professor Victor. He's saying that it is the government of Rishi Sunak which has much to explain, perhaps, although he may have distanced itself and said the characterization is something that the British government doesn't agree with. But if you look at the documentary, and there is no Chinese link as per Professor Victor, that if anything, this is ludicrous according to him.
There might not be any direct Chinese link to this. But as I said, Chinese will not miss any opportunity to bring down India a peg or two as it would deem fit. Now, as far as the editorial policy of BBC is concerned, on paper it might be that it is independent and so on and so forth. But you would have also seen the letter of Lord Rami Ranger, who said that there would be some Pakistani-based Pakistani officials, in the BBC who would have been instrumental in bringing out this documentary. And of course, BBC will be able to take funding from whichever source offers it. There might not be a direct quid pro quo as such that, you are taking money and you have to produce this documentary against India. But I'm sure there would be definitely that encouragement that, okay, if you are going to do something against India, as far as India's leaders standing in the world is concerned, I think this is a welcome opportunity.
Kuldeep Shekhawat,
Kuldeep
Shekhawat, how are you reading this piece in Spectator?
Well, there are two aspects to it. First of all, Huawei is going to be removed from UK completely in 2027. But there had been some concessions in last 1 year. So the company is still operating in UK. But I still remember a matter whereby one of the members of parliament, Barry Gardner, was found accepting money from a Chinese solicitor. And this was not a small amount of money. 500,000 is what he declared in those days. So Chinese people and Chinese government do believe in pumping money directly or indirectly to British establishments and including the members of parliament. So they have this habit of influencing the system. As far as BBC is concerned, BBC, I personally don't feel that they must be accepting money from Huawei, because BBC is losing money in this country big time. One of their studios, which was quite a big place, White City, is completely shut down and is up for sale.
Yes, because they are cash-strapped and they are losing money, then why not believe what the Spectator is saying?
Yeah, no. What I'm saying is, I believe that BBC must be getting some money, but only for this documentary, I don't believe that. They must be getting some money on the whole to influence the British system, British ideology, British parliament, British public, to support Chinese ideology somehow, like what they have done with Barry Gardner, the member of parliament from Wembley. And this is a normal practice for Chinese companies to behave. They do these kind of things in various parts of the world, and they are facing problems all over the world. People are now waking up, and this is happening. But I personally don't believe that only for this documentary, because this documentary was produced actually by two Indian girls. These two Indian girls produced this documentary, and we are trying to find out them and their
But
entire detail,
Kuldeep
which
Shekhawat,
was
because
available
it's
on the
driven
net,
by
is
biases.
vanished.
You have a perfect
Correct.
alibi by saying that if the Indians are producing it, then it's all right. I mean, the question is that it is the BBC which funded this documentary. The documentary doesn't show the complete picture or the correct picture. It has completely overlooked and not included what the Supreme Court has said. But the larger question then is that this broadcaster, how should the world be viewing it? Professor Victor, you are of the opinion, and you said that the BBC has been banned in China and there is no linkage whatsoever. But if the documentary of this nature comes out at this particular time, when India has taken over the G20 presidency, the world is looking towards India because India is setting the agenda for the world going ahead. How much of anxiousness is there in Chinese establishment in Beijing?
Allow me to emphasize several points about how China looks at India. First of all, China congratulates India for the host of the G20 for 2023. And China really wishes the G20 in 2023 under the presidency of India will be a huge success. Secondly, China does believe that both China and India are developing countries, emerging economies, and even though our circumstances are very different, we face similar challenges and opportunities. Therefore, to cooperate with each other rather than to be hostile against each other between China and India will be the better approach. Now, the third point, allow me to emphasize, is that China is fully aware.
Let's have Professor Victor and Ashok Sajanhar on the screen now, please. Go ahead.
Yeah. Yes, please.
Please go ahead.
Yes. The third point is that while China is fully aware of the territorial disputes between China and India, China is eager to find the diplomatic solutions to the diplomatic problems between the two countries, try to put them behind us so that both China and India can be freed up from these disputes created not by China, not by India, but by the British colonial administrators in India. Neither China nor India should be held hostage by the bad legacies left behind, not by China, not by India, but by the British. Why should we suffer the bad consequences of the British rule of India? Therefore, I truly believe between China and India, if we use the right wisdom, we can make sure that China and India can be partners with each other rather than adversaries against each other. We can help to make the 21st century the truly Asian century for the satisfaction of everyone in the world. The 21st century should be the Asian century based on cooperation and solidarity between China and India. That's my belief, and I do believe many of my countrymen in China share my view.
So many people actually believe that it's a good move and India is welcomed in celebrating itself. But Ashok Sajanhar, you have been one of the signatories in this letter which was sent to Tim Davie, the Director General of the BBC. And you make an important point that how, the 452-page judgment of the Supreme Court had upheld the closure report which was filed by the Supreme Court appointed SIT, that is the Special Investigation Team, after years of investigation, and it had said clearly that it was that all the charges and allegations that were made against Mr. Modi was ultra sensational revelations which was made by these officers, Sanjeev Bhatt, R.B. Srikumar, Haren Pandya. In the words of the court, it was to sensationalize and politicize the matters in issue, although replete with falsehood. If all these aspects have not been included in this documentary, and a documentary of this nature comes out at this time, what exactly is the BBC planning to do? And even if the UK Premier says that he doesn't believe in the characterization, should his words be taken on a face value?
No, I think as far as Rishi Sunak's words are concerned, I don't have any doubt that they need to be taken at face value. But I think as far as the BBC issue is concerned, it does appear to be a motivated propaganda and an agenda-driven documentary, because you are relying on a report of 2002, and all the developments, Maria, that have taken place in 20 years after that, they have been given short shrift. They have really not been taken on board. So I think that leads to grave doubts that this is all motivated, this is all biased and prejudiced. But if you permit, I'd like to just make one point as far as our Chinese friend is saying. What he's saying, it looks, sounds very nice, both in speech as well as on paper. I think the problem is that China needs to act on what it says. It needs to walk the talk. Unfortunately, in India, Maria, we have not seen them walking the talk either on the border or even on issues like India's membership of the nuclear suppliers group. Now, what is the problem there? That's not a British, conspiracy. This is the Chinese stand not to allow India to play its due role in international affairs. India's membership of the UN Security Council, all the other 4 permanent members agree. It is only China that is creating the obstacle. Even as far as the border issues are concerned, it was the agreement of 93 and 96, the confidence building measures, that you will not bring your troops and you will not bring your heavy armory to the line of actual control. China tore those agreements, threw them to the dust paper basket, and brought its troops to the line of actual control. This has not been done by Britain. I think the British went away from here 70 years ago. We have to manage our own affairs. I don't think
let me give the final words to
China
Kuldeep
has to
Shekhawat.
walk the talk.
Kuldeep
China
Shekhawat
has to walk the talk.
Yes. So we are looking at links here. The point being alleged by Mahesh Jethamalani is that here is BBC which does a hit job, and if anything, this piece of work or documentary, as it is being called, is actually a hit job.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
is it up? And it is clearly up for sale.
Yes, I'm telling you, this is completely a useless kind of a documentary that was created by BBC team. They have not done a good job, firstly. Secondly, they haven't done journalistic satisfaction to the journalist. Even if you look at it as a third person, this documentary has a lot of loopholes. Amazingly, you cannot believe that BBC will do something like this, but they have done it. Thirdly, on the documentary, there is no other side. When we asked this question to BBC, they said, oh, we gave ample time to the government of India and they have not responded. Well, I don't accept that government of India will not respond, first of all. And secondly, how can they not include the other reports and the Supreme Court report in the documentary? So it's a absolutely rubbish documentary that has been created by them. And
we haven't really seen the last word here, because as Mahesh Jethamalani was saying that there's several information that he has which he'll be bringing out in the public domain over the next few days. Really appreciate your time, Professor Victor.